Welcome to this Oasis Podcast, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Glyn Fussell, and I am one of the Oasis directors. In this series, I'll be introducing you to some fascinating people we know and work with. People who lead, people who coach, people who facilitate and develop others, and the organisations they're part of. We offer you their points of view to spark inspiration and insight to help you, your teams and your organisation make a positive impact in practice and through relationship. In this episode, Presence the podcast, I'll be in conversation with actress and international personal impact coach Corinna Powlesland. Why do some people's contributions to conversations get heard whilst others fall unnoticed to the sidelines? How can we make more of an impact? Some people have developed a fundamental sense that they're worth hearing. They've developed the confidence that allows them to be seen by others. That belief enables them to cope with the inevitable nerves that can surround public speaking. They can hold their own in a room, even one full of big personalities and competing voices. It can be encapsulated by a seemingly magical and elusive quality. They have presence. This podcast will be great for you if you're wanting to build more confidence and impact in the way you present yourself to the world. You'll gain an understanding of what presence is in practice and how you can develop your own authentic presence in your personal and professional life. In conversation, we'll be offering you some simple, concrete things you can do now and looking at the inner and outer factors that help manage our nerves and enable us to shine. Hi, Corinna.
Hello, Glyn. How are you?
I'm very, very well, thank you. And I'm very aware that talking about issues or subjects like presence, that I feel the need to have enormous presence right from the beginning of the recording.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Not a helpful way to approach it. And this is a subject both of us feel very passionately about. And I thought it might be helpful just to start with for listeners to understand what the connection is between us.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking about how long we've known each other, and I think it's over 25 years. We're that old. And we originally met when we were both working as actors in the West End.
That's right. And you've carried on in your career as an actress, and I left that world and moved into leadership development. Interestingly, however, you have also been working as a coach around the world, helping people really connect with how they can increase their sense of impact, personal impact and presence.
Absolutely. I mean, that amongst many other influencing skills, but there is a direct connection, I think, between the training one receives as an actor and the experience of being an actor in front of different sized audiences. And the way that those techniques that one is taught can translate into the boardroom or into the lecture hall.
Or even into a meeting where there's lots of gobby people and you're trying to get your voice heard.
Exactly. Particularly if you're not such an extrovert personality. So there are many, many ways to look at the idea of presence. And I know we're both fascinated by it. So I've been looking forward to this immensely.
And there's something for me about presence and authenticity. And because you and I have been running a program for many years now called Speak to Be Heard, which is really a workshop in how to increase your confidence in the way that you present yourself to the world. I think people often come onto that thinking, oh, please don't make me turn into a great big booming actor, because that's not who I am. And for me, it's not about that at all. It's about how do you help someone bring more of who they are to the fore.
I think that's I'll be interested to discuss that with you during the podcast, because there are many ways to do this authentically. And I think you have to approach it authentically because we can sniff a fake a mile off. So it's very nuanced, actually. And I think the longer you and I have worked together using presence techniques, the more we understand our own language around it. So it's great to be able to share that.
Sure. And my own interest in this is a very personal one in terms of my own desire to be heard in my life and to feel I have a place in the world. But it also comes from the extensive work I've done in leadership development. And even working with leaders who have an international remit or managing huge budgets, noticing their choice to be present or not present, their choice to be visible or not visible, and becoming fascinated by what do you need in terms of the inner landscape that supports you to be confident in situations that are quite high stakes sometimes, like the ones you've described.
My work in leadership as well. My experience has very much been when one asks a participant at the beginning of a program, what are the aspirational qualities you would like to own? More often than not, I mean, right at the top of the list are always charisma and presence. So unpicking that abstract concept, and it is an abstract concept, in order to help others to develop it, feels like a real gift.
And for me, so much is to do with personal confidence and that belief that you're worth listening to.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I'd also say, whilst developing that sort of confidence in the knowledge that confidence is a fluctuating thing, it's not set in stone, that there are physical techniques that one can use to promote that sort of inner landscape that you're talking about. And I think it'd be really helpful for us in this discussion to think about it in two ways. I look at it in two ways: the inside that you're talking about, but to separate as well the outside, the physiological, the physical aspects of it.
Yeah, I think the separation, whilst it's artificial, it is helpful because there are adjustments that you can make on both levels, the inner and the outer, that can massively increase your ability to relax and be yourself.
Yeah, and I would say that I agree with you, and that feeling that one is able to be heard and having confidence in one's voice and the persona we display to others, the impact we have on others, and getting an understanding around that. There's nothing like that to increase confidence. It's as I said, I think of it as a gift, actually.
I've always been very struck in my work with leaders, and I've been working with leaders, I think, for about 20 years now, that there are some common themes that come up over and over again, irrespective of the context that the person's leading in. And one of them is definitely having the courage of your convictions, being able to fully commit to something, and have the inner confidence to stay upright when things don't work very well or things go wrong, and you recover from that. And I've always found that fascinating. And I always think when I'm coaching leaders, if I say to them, this is a theme I'm hearing a lot with other leaders, they're always quite surprised. It's like a little bit of a shame cupboard that they hide their lack of confidence in, or their inability to commit fully to things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that there's a lot spoken about imposter syndrome, and I think there are elements of overlap, sort of deeply buried questions about who we are and how we deserve to be seen and heard. So I would completely agree with you.
And what we know, I think, on an instinctive level, is when someone walks into the room, we know whether to pay attention or not. There's something about some people that commands your attention, even if that person happens to be small in stature or not particularly attractive. There's something about people and the way that they carry themselves that's on some level, cellular level, on some instinctive level, we respond to that. And we think, oh, look, there she is, or there he is, he's just walked in.
Yeah, and I think that's relatively straightforward, although none of this is straightforward. But I would say if we feel confident and competent and we're comfortable in our own skin, we are likely to choose to be visible. And I'll talk more about the choice factor. But I think if we're anxious, it makes sense that we shrink, that we turn. I think of it as like a dimmer switch, that if you don't want to be seen, if you're feeling underconfident on the inside, you're likely not to want to be as visible. And I think there are elements of that are conscious and unconscious.
Mm-hmm. I've always been very fascinated by listening to people who are presenting when there is a profound disconnect between words and their body, or the way in which they're delivering the words. So I hate to say it, but I think sometimes of Andy Murray, who to me sounds incredibly depressed when he talks about his victories. There's something that, whilst his victories are they're evident, they're right in front of you, he chooses to talk about them in a very kind of, I'm very excited kind of voice, which for me sounds like, I find it a turn off. So there's something for me about culture as well with presence. How much do I command the room? How much do I allow myself to be visible will depend on the messages that I've received in my life about the kind of person I am, what my gender is, whether it's okay for me to show emotion, whether it's okay for me to raise my voice. And many sections of society are told to keep quiet. So there's something about how you step through that as well in order to be able to take your space in the world without feeling apologetic about it.
I know we've spoken about this a lot, but and you referenced it at the beginning of the conversation, but how amazed we are often with people who are very senior in organizations who have, very small presence and very small voices. And that's a really common thing. And, speaking as a woman, when I'm working with groups of particularly young women in organizations, there's still a hang on from that message, be seen and not heard, so there's still work to be done. We're certainly not at the end of the journey. I think we're barely at the beginning of that journey, in an acceptance that it's okay to be heard. In fact, it's more than okay. It's invited.
Mm. And keeping going with the cultural thing, there is something in the, I can only talk as a British person, but in the British psyche about being understated and not going too far with things. I think that's that we're paying a bit of a price for that, in that people struggle because of that belief of not going too far with things. They struggle to fully commit to what they're saying or how they're saying it. I've noticed it in singing as well, that sometimes when you ask people to sing or when people sing at parties, etc., there's those who bellow it out, but then more often there'll be people who want to keep it really small because they think, if I keep it small, it won't be so embarrassing. And weirdly, it's more embarrassing because the commitment to it, you being wholly in, out of tune, bad timing, whatever it is, that's more interesting to see and watch and be the audience for than a little kind of mouse voice hiding behind a hand in the corner of the room.
Yeah, and I'm picking up on that idea. I love that, that idea of commitment. It's central to having presence. I mean, if we think about, I think sometimes to help us understand presence, we need to look at examples of great presence. And I would always talk about elite sports people, great actors, great musicians, children when they're immersed in play, when they are fully present, when they are fully focused. And that plays into your commitment theme, I think, Glyn. If we are in the moment, if we are available to other people, if we're connecting with others without distraction and without reflecting on ourselves too much, if we can step outside of ourselves and step towards other people, our presence increases. And I love what Benjamin Zander, the conductor and pianist, he says when people have great presence, they have shining eyes. And I think it's true. You can see it. It's electric, and it's a kinesthetic quality which you can't replicate.
Mm. And Zander has a belief in the way of operating, which is to choose to believe that people will do their best and are brilliant until they prove otherwise. And it's so inspiring. And I think that is at the heart of this. If you are able to cultivate that belief about yourself, for some people that's going to feel so far away. But being able to believe that in this instance, in this moment, I'm worth listening to, plus adding some more tangible, technical, performative aspects. And I think those, for me, fall into categories. Can I hear you? Are you audible? And does your body reflect what you're saying? And are you engaging me in a relationship? And those things, I think, can be learned.
Oh, I would absolutely agree. And before we move into those sort of more physiological and physical aspects, there was one other thing I just wanted to add about that inside, that inner landscape. And that is about a clarity of intention, of really understanding what it is that situation requires of us and the effect we want to have on other people. So it doesn't mean that one is being inauthentic. It just means that you've already thought through what that impact needs to be. So whether it's to nurture another person or a group of people, to encourage, to motivate, to inspire, that requires a different level of engagement in ourselves and a commitment in ourselves in order for it to translate to other people. And I think that can really help people deal with this question of authenticity or not authenticity, because it becomes a choice. It becomes a conscious intention.
And with that choice and conscious intention, I think there is another choice, which is how much energy do I need to give this?
Yes.
Being able to assess. And I realize as we're talking, it probably sounds like you have to spend your whole life calculating this stuff. My sense is that there's a period during which that might be true. And then it slightly becomes second nature. You're able to read what's required of you in the room. And you're able to do that more naturally because you've given it some attention and you know how that feels in your body.
Yeah. And of course, in order to be able to read it in the room, you have to be present. Because if you're in any way absent, you're not going to pick up those clues. You're not going to be able to understand what's required of you. So there's an interconnection there that's really important. Well, essential, actually.
Yeah. And there's what's required of you, and there's also what am I prepared to give in this moment. So sometimes the choice might be not to have presence because it's not really worth your while in that moment. You know, the gobby personalities are doing their thing. I'm just going to sit quietly till the end. And then one day it might be different, that you think, actually, my voice isn't being heard. My points aren't being raised by anyone else. I have to get in. And if you're used to being on the back foot and waiting, that's going to take more energy from you and potentially more volume, more projection.
Absolutely. So I like, and I know you and I have both used, particularly in Speak to Be Heard, the work of Patsy Rodenberg, who, for those who don't know her, is the world's leading voice coach. In her work around presence, she talks about circles of energy, and whether or not, exactly as you say, Glyn, whether or not we choose to have a smaller circle of energy, a kind of more magnetic circle of energy, or a more front foot, more dynamic circle of energy. And I know we've played with this in the past. If you think of those two as a cat and a dog, You have a cat that welcomes you, that will greet you, that will let you move towards it, or you have a dog that demands attention. And I think most of our interactions in life are about that dynamic. When am I the cat and when am I the dog? And what does the circumstance require? And actually, if you're standing up in front of a group of people, and let's say there are more than 10 in that group, you're going to need some dog in your repertoire. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. It's an energetic field, and it's required of you. It's the performative element.
Mm. Mm. Well, why don't we kind of start with some of the basics? Well, you talked earlier about the inner and the outer, and that the outer can influence the inner. You can start with that. So the kind of the more physical things, the things that we learnt as actors. And I'm wondering if you could just talk to some of that stuff in terms of where do you start with it even?
Yeah, and actually I think it's, although we've spoken quite a lot about the inner landscape, you're right. I think from a practical perspective, to create some clarity and unpick this abstract word, there are some really simple things that you can practice, and you can think about. So if I just share a few of those, then we can talk about the more sophisticated edge and about the nuance of them. Because like any of these techniques, if they're overplayed, they can come across as ridiculous and unbelievable. And that's the reverse of what we want. However, so slowly, and taking gentle steps, I would say to people, as we grow older, we, generally speaking, I would say, develop more comfort with ourselves, with our physical being. So it's kind of looking at what happens to us when we increase in years, because a lot of people we're working with are very young and starting out in their careers. So if I was to unpick the things that have really changed in myself, it would be enjoying my physicality more. So that would mean standing upright, having really good posture, expanding the area across the chest. You know, Amy Cuddy in her work, she's a Harvard professor who works in this field, talks about expanding the gesture in a welcoming way, not in a kind of forced way. So opening up the body. It makes sense to me that if we want to have more visibility, we literally have to magnify what we have available to us. So I'm 5'2", but no one ever thinks that I'm a shorty. People will sometimes be really surprised when they say, how tall are you? Because, my God, I know how to be broad. I know how to be a broad. So standing tall, great eye contact, having the confidence to really be curious with your eyes and to connect with people, be fascinated by others and by their contributions. Something I spend a lot of time talking about with younger people that I work with is slowing down our speed of talking. I think we notice in anyone who feels they have the right to speak, they very rarely rush. And again, that's something that naturally happens with age because our energy levels change. But consciously recognizing that by taking more time, we're unconsciously saying to others, I deserve to be listened to. So that's really important. Learning how to be comfortable in silence. And so placing pauses which give other people the opportunity to assimilate the information you've given them. And the combination of being able to hold eye contact with people, to register what they're thinking and feeling, and being confident in one's own silence is really, really powerful. And that's all used in actor training. So these are techniques that can be learnt. And as you rightly said, Glyn, even if they start by feeling uncomfortable for you and inauthentic, like any other habit, they become muscle memory. And over time, they become part of your repertoire, and your repertoire changes. But you need the mindset to recognize that you are able to do those things. But it's very exciting when you see people embracing it, and people transform in front of our eyes. And I love that about this work.
I agree. For me, there is something very fundamental in all of this, which is, how do you become conscious of what you're doing without becoming self-conscious? So in our acting training, a lot of emphasis was given on how do you become centered and grounded as an actor, so that from that place of strength and to a certain degree neutrality, everything you do is conscious, and that you can come back time and time again to feeling grounded. To me, that's connected very much with the Esme Preston School of Dance stuff that you said earlier, with the standing up straight and having good posture, because it's fundamental, and it's something we've all heard all the way through our lives, probably from people that irritated the hell out of us.
Yes.
How you stand in a way that conveys a sense of stillness and power, and gives you the best chance you have of accessing your resourcefulness. And in our work together, we've done a lot of work with individuals to get them to stand still. I remember lying on someone's feet once, actually, when they were doing a presentation, because they were pacing, and the pacing was what you were looking at. It wasn't them. It was what are they doing with their feet? Why are they doing it? And what they were doing was their body was unconsciously saying, everyone, I'm scared. Don't let me do this.
So unconscious apologies, and we all have them. It's and the important thing that you're saying, Glyn, is become conscious of what they are in yourself. So much of this is about developing your self-awareness to the extreme, really. I think if you know what your habits are and you know what your body is going to do under stress and anxiety, then you can do something about managing it. So there's definitely a self-management element to this, and a self-awareness to be able to stand outside of yourself whilst you're investigating this for yourself, to say, what is it I do? What happens to me? And to be really curious with yourself and not judgmental, because that doesn't help this process, I don't think. And what you're talking about centering, that neutral place where you look comfortable, your body isn't doing anything weird and distracting, where you look like you're happy in that space, that you have ownership of that space. The interesting thing for me is, and it plays into why this matters, is that as soon as you can inhabit those simple techniques, your physiology responds in the positive way that it's designed to respond. So if I can make that a little bit clearer, the part of the nervous system that's responsible for helping us to calm and to give us self-control relies on us having a straight spine. It relies on us being able to breathe into the stomach, into the diaphragm, into the chest. It relies on the breath being able to fill the body in order for the calming mechanism to operate and for the mind to clear. So this is interconnected. I mean, none of this is disconnected. Our physiology responds directly to the physicality we're suggesting to have presence. And that's really exciting. So I talk about having the vagus nerve, which is the part of the nervous system that's responsible for the calming mechanism, being like our broadband. And if our broadband is out of sync, we know what happens there. Everything's all over the place. That's precisely what happens to the body, and therefore the mind. So these things are interconnected. And if you can start to appreciate that, something that might initially feel technical and might feel inauthentic becomes something really positive for you as a whole person, and allowing for the fact that you and I work in a whole person learning environment. It's fundamental to this process.
Mm. Part of that, from my perspective, is acknowledging I am going to be nervous. In some circumstances, I am going to feel wobbly, and that's fine. And there are things I can do to manage that. So I often find that people often face challenges to being present or not when they're sitting in a meeting, as opposed to being on a stage. We often find ourselves in meetings where that's the dilemma: how present am I going to be? And for me, there are subtle adjustments I can make. So putting my feet flat on the floor, making sure my spine is straight, as you mentioned, taking deep breaths, slowing my breathing down, it all regulates that calming system. The vagus nerve gets activated, and luckily I know that works, because I still get really nervous. Certain times, I'm as you know, I'm a singer. If I have to do a solo, I have my heart pounding in my chest. But I know there's a safety net, and the safety net is slow down and breathe and stand properly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's translating the standing version to a seated version. And right now, we're in an environment where we're operating mostly virtually. So I think it's quite interesting to think about, when do people virtually have presence? I think it all of this translates, all of these techniques are the same across. The principles are exactly the same. Be still, be focused, don't be distracted, have good positive energy, know how to listen, know how to pause. We're all recognizing that in these virtual calls we're all on now. And as you said, keep breathing, keep feeding the parasympathetic nervous system so that we retain a sense of self-control. And self-control, I think, is absolutely central to the notion of presence.
And the idea of that being one of the prerequisites for creating space. So as you were saying earlier, the nervous system creating the desire to gabble and rush, as opposed to slow down and create little pools of silence that are going to make what I say absolutely fascinating to other people.
And so I think, how long have we been running Speak to Be Heard now at Oasis?
5 years.
Yeah. And it's taken us 4 years to come up with our 5 key words that we introduce on the second day. And I think they really, those 5 words, if you started with them and you thought about working with each of them, they add up to the components of presence. And they are space, pace, release, focus, and breathe. And if you're happy for me to share them, Glyn, they are space. Be aware of the space you command, whether it's a small space or a larger space. Finding a comfort in that and knowing what's required of your energy levels to be able to fill that and connect with people in that space. Pace. We've talked about how important it is for clarity, for nuance, for emotional contagion, to make sure that you slow your pace down. Not all the time, but around your key messages. Create presence around them. Give them space and give them a slower pace. Release is an interesting one because we haven't mentioned it yet, not directly anyway. And release is around not forcing any of this physical stuff to happen, to actually release into it rather than to force yourselves towards it. So when we're talking about broader gesture, opening the chest, it's not forced, stiff version of that. It's a gentle, released version of it. It looks comfortable and feels comfortable. And then focus, which is a quality of outer stillness, but it's determined by a foundation of inner stillness. So it's directly connected to the way we breathe, which is the next component. And we know that when your breathing is calm, the mind can be more still, allowing you to focus on the present moment. And we can see that focus, as I've said before, as an attention through the eyes and a level of connection with others. So that focus and that ability to be still, what we'd really recommend any mind-body practice that gives you self-control and that can help you to access that inner stillness. So that inner stillness translates to an outer focus. The breath control and the use of breathing techniques, you and I both recognize that that's at the heart of all of this and is a prerequisite, really, breathing well and knowing how to utilize your breath. So simple breathing techniques, there's so much online that you can tap into to start to understand the mechanism of breath. All of those things add up to presence. And that which leads me, just one thing coming from that idea of release and not force. It is that when people turn the volume and magnify these qualities up to the extreme, you get something that's quite unpalatable and quite unbelievable and sometimes ridiculous. And I know you and I were talking about this the other day, Glyn, but I was talking about Boris Johnson. And when in the early briefings, he was really overplaying this very serious persona. And of course, very serious time and saying incredibly important things. But the persona wasn't authentic because he was overplaying the things we're talking about, as opposed to the wonderful John Coleshaw impersonation of Bad Boris, who's the Boris that we actually believe, the authentic version. So when you're starting to work with these principles, we would, I think, both agree on take one at a time, work with that one idea and recognize that these are nuanced principles. You know, if you go hell for leather, you're likely to get, people are going to think you've been abducted by aliens. You know, feel your way into it. Ask for feedback. You know, how do you find my energy is a great question. And you might need to explain why you're asking that question. But if somebody says to you, it's a little bit downbeat, it's, I wouldn't call it exciting, it's not that engaging, you've got some feedback to work with. So I maybe need more energy in my interactions with people. Or am I using too much energy? Am I squashing people? Am I not giving them space? So be fascinated by the principles, I think.
Mm. And of course, other people's feedback is so helpful. And it is also, sometimes people have an agenda to keep us small. And I think that add to that a more of an inquiry into what works for you. So getting familiar with, when I'm at my best, these things are in place. So I've done my preparation. I've had nice sleep the night before. I've got some water by my side. All of those things, and kind of giving yourself some self-praise when you have little victories, so that it strengthens your willingness to come out the dark cave into blinking into the sunlight, which is how it can feel a bit, I think, if you're becoming present in situations where previously you haven't been able to. So encouraging yourself, getting familiar with what you might need.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I love the work of Lev Vygotsky, who's a Russian psychologist, whose focus was on children and play and how children learn And he says that, when we're kids, if you're in a healthy environment, we perform our way into being new versions of ourselves. And we perform our way into learning, and we play our way into learning. And there's something for me in that at a certain point we think we can't play anymore, or far too grown up to play. But this requires a playful attitude. And the more playful you can be in your approach to it and your mindset, the more you're likely to find, the more you're likely to find different ways of behaving that have a very different impact on other people. So yes, a playful attitude, I think, and a fascination with oneself and with other people.
Our belief about this is that this approach, this whole person approach to increasing presence that relies on the physical as well as the emotional and intellectual, that really applies to any context. So people talk about executive presence, for example, and I've always thought, what's the difference? It's just about you being yourself, given the context that you're in and what that requires of you.
And I can't bear it as a phrase.
No, it's horrible.
Because it suggests status to me. It suggests playing status games. And I don't think I don't see that as a leadership quality, an aspirational leadership quality. I think it's inauthentic. So presence is presence.
Yeah. One of the most common pieces of feedback I hear through my clients that their bosses have given them is you need to develop more gravitas. It's one of those words like you need to be more strategic. It's like a catch-all for something. And developing more gravitas in the past has meant aping people that you see have impact, and has led to some pretty horrific leadership styles in the 80s and 90s, and I'm afraid now. For me, to develop gravitas, you need to develop your core stability and your ability to feed yourself so you can have gravitas, so you can be that version of yourself as opposed to a facsimile of someone else that you've seen be really nasty to their staff or command a room in a particular way. You have to find your version of it. And that's, for me, why I'm interested in this combination of things, the kind of psychological, the emotional, the spiritual even, and the physical in how you bring that to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating subject. And I think, the benefits of having presence and knowing how to step into one's own presence are huge. I mean, not just, when we were talking about this podcast and we were saying, what do people get from this? What are the benefits? And I think for me, having real self-confidence and self-belief, it really helps to increase your confidence and self-belief. Opportunities open up, relationships open up to you. You're taken more seriously. You're more likely to be listened to. And actually, I think, the etymology of the word gravitas comes from the Latin, serious. There's a, if you want to be listened to, if you want to attract attention. So one of the things I haven't actually specifically talked about and said I would was, I think it's a choice. I think we choose to have presence. And as you rightly said, Glyn, there are times when that would cost too much. And also, we don't always have to have presence. It'd be exhausting if you always had to have presence. But knowing how to step into it when it's required, I think it's, the benefits are vast.
Beautifully put. I was going to add, having presence will also help you lose weight and become more attractive. I'm not sure that's true. Or necessary.
I think that's you wanting that.
Yeah. Corinna, thank you so much for taking part in this today. It's as always, a great pleasure to talk to you. And I know that this sort of thing comes alive when it's possible to be physically with someone in a room. So I'm hoping this has given people some insight into some of the things they can do, or ways of thinking differently or acting differently that might give them a better chance of being the version of themselves they want to be.
It's been a real pleasure. I've loved this. I could talk about it all day. I know we haven't got all day. I really hope that it helps to unpick that abstract word. And let's hope that we're soon able to get back into the classroom and the boardroom and do this stuff face to face.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Oasis podcast. We hope you've enjoyed listening and that it's given you plenty of food for thought. You can subscribe to our podcast series and listen out for the next episode. And if you'd like to know more about the work we do, or to get in touch with us, do so via our website, oasishumanrelations.org.uk. Thank you.